Thank you for that. And just today is also our Director Rabs Dixon's last meeting with us as our Director, so I'd like to put on record my thanks to Rab for his service to Nestrans, going all the way back to its establishment as a voluntary partnership in 2001 through to its establishment as a statutory partnership in 2016, and more recently for his service as Director since 2019. Rab's made a huge contribution to transport policy and projects across the city and across across the city and region, ranging from a legacy of transport strategies, local rail development, the National Cycle Network, quality bus partnerships, and more recently helping get the wheels moving on our ambitious Aberdeen rapid transit plans. As Chair, I'd like to thank Rab for 42 years of public service in planning and transport planning, and I'd like to wish him a long and happy retirement and many, many rounds of golf during that time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Yep, and I'll just pass on to Alan for his comment.
Yeah, very much. I would certainly, on behalf of Aberdeenshire Council, firstly echo the comments that you've raised there, Chair, and thanking Rav for his many years of service, not just to Nestrans here, but just to the wider community and transport as well. And finally, I'd also specifically like to thank Rav for all the help that he's given me, and during the time I've actually had the joy of chairing the Nestrans Board, both here in the meetings and just the wider council, etc. When I would go out to other endeavours, how we say, from the regional transport partnership meetings to, dare I say, even helping me get my golfing game back together again down. So Rab, wish you many happy years in retirement and many happy rounds, and I'd hope to see you at some point on the golf course. Thank you very much for your service.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Chair. Rab, I know you'll be wriggling in your seat with all these kind words, but it really does come from the heart that you have been incredibly kind and thoughtful as a member of Nestrans, and probably all the time that you've worked for the public. And just from a personal note, for somebody who's been around since the inception and through the ups and downs of the Nestrans journey, you really have been a power of strength to members of the board and to your staff. And thank you so much from the Labour group as well. You definitely known as a man who is a railway man to the core, and but all those other aspects of Nestrans, you have worked so diligently over the years on all those things that Michael mentioned. So all the very best to you and your family. Enjoy your retirement. My goodness, you deserve it.
We'll get the most saying. Oh, sorry, Maggie as well.
Thank you. I've known Rab for 37 years, we established today, which I suspect is probably longer than most of you, because some of you probably aren't even that age yet. I've worked with him in a number of different capacities over 28, I think, of those years. So I kind of thought, well, maybe I could take some credit for what he's achieved, but actually the opposite is true. What Rab taught me very early on in my planning career was the importance of being able to think strategically, whilst at the same time making sure you keep paying attention to detail, and in Rab's case, to some extent, that version into pernicketiness, however you say it, if it's even a word. Anyway, good traits generally. The importance of building a great team around him, which Rab certainly did at the council and very much has at Nestrans, which is great. And most importantly, I think for me, is to do all of that with a great sense of humour, which Rab has always had. If sometimes his humour might be slightly questionable, but he's always there, which is really important. As Michael said, Rab has been a huge asset to transport in the North East and actually beyond into Scotland. But I do understand that his golf handicap has perhaps suffered a bit recently, and so totally get why he feels like he needs to get that back on track. But I will, and I'm sure we all will miss him very much.
We've got a few more weeks out of him yet, so we'll hopefully get the most out of him in that last bit of time. Just moving on, do we have any declarations of interest or transparency statements from anyone here? I'm not seeing any hands, so move on to the minute of the board for the last meeting from 27th of November. Are we happy to agree that, or are there any questions? Are we agreed? Agreed. And we're now joined today by Fiona Brown, the Interim Director of Transport and Strategy, Interim Director of Transport Strategy and Analysis at Transport Scotland, who will be giving us a presentation. So I'll pass on to Fiona now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thanks to Paul from Nestrans for sharing the slides. Good afternoon, and I'm delighted to be here accepting Rab's invitation to present at the board today, and thanks for having me. A little bit about me first before we get into the presentation. So as Councillor said, I'm Interim Director of Transport Strategy and Analysis at Transport Scotland, which means I'm part of the senior management team and responsible for the oversight of the National Transport Strategy. And also that includes the strategy for our investments and key policy decisions, really making that case for investment in transport and supporting specific projects and programmes with our analytical services within our MA directorate, so transport planners, economists, statisticians and researchers, to really ensure that we've got that robust evidence base in our decision making. Also lead on UK relations, cross-government working in Scotland with regard to transport and key relationships. And I lead on transport's contribution to government's priorities, most significantly in transport, that being net zero, and leading on the contribution to the next climate change plan. And at the moment, I'm also responsible for aviation, which is a new string to my bow, or wing to my aircraft, or whatever the analogy might be. Therefore, I've got a good oversight, I think, in that role across all the work of Transport Scotland, but I don't necessarily have all the details, so bear with me in the presentation and any questions that we'll have afterwards and discussion we'll have. I know at the November meeting, attendance of Transport Scotland at the board was raised, and whilst in the past there might have been regular attendance or a kind of standing invite, I would say probably since the pandemic and some resource prioritisation and realignment of resources within Transport Scotland, that's not been possible. And just to say that's same across all of the RTPs. It's not that we're not coming to Nestrans Board, not attending board meetings regularly across RTPs. But that's not to say we're not engaging significantly, and I think really importantly with RTPs. We engage across a number of groups and programmes, and of course open to hearing and receiving feedback on the effectiveness of those and alternative approaches. And we have heard from RTPs that our kind of absence at RTP chairs had been noted kind of post-pandemic, and we've certainly reinvigorated that. And that's not just in an attendance and listening capacity, but actually being there and contributing to the agendas. I've been at the last couple of RTP chairs, I think, have been. And the Cabinet Secretary is also planning to attend one later this year. And then another thing just to note in terms of engagement, we have the National Transport Strategy Board, and that's actually taking place tomorrow. There hasn't been one for almost a year, and that's co-chaired by the Cabinet Secretary and Councillor McGregor on behalf of COSLA. And one of the items of discussion, given that we haven't met as a board for such a long time, is a refresh of the purpose and membership of that board. And I'll be happy to share more details on the outcomes of that discussion after the board tomorrow. So moving on to the kind of core purpose of what I wanted to talk about today, and I mentioned the National Transport Strategy, and I think what this slide really is really for me the kind of framework of what I think the engagement between Transport Scotland and regional transport partnerships and Nestrans should be, and that's really our on that strategic basis. We have a national transport, you have a regional transport strategy, which are very much aligned, and I think that came from the collaboration we had through the National Transport Strategy. And I think these diagrams, the National Transport Strategy one with the orange, blue, red, is the one that you probably, if you're engaged in transport, you probably see a lot, and I think very much aligned with the pillars in your RTS. So for me, I think it's just that we have a shared vision, and we're each mapping a course on how to deliver against these. And I think see the kind of strategic importance of our relationship is how we support one another, collaborate with one another, and across the transport sector and across the 3 levels of transport authority we have in Scotland, and delivering against these. And I think that collaboration was felt really strongly in the development of the National Transport Strategy, but I think as widely recognised has been more challenging in the delivery space. And I would reflect that I think partly that's because of the timing. So the National Transport Strategy was published in the February 2020, and we all know what happened the month after that. But also, let's face it, it is more I would reflect that collaboration, when you have a shared vision, is, we could say, easier and more challenging on, okay, how do we deliver against that vision? So I think moving into the collaboration and delivery space is always more challenging, and I think we face up to that, but of course timing has placed an impact as well. I believe Nestrans and Transport Scotland do have strong, positive and mutually beneficial relationship, and today I'll cover some of the areas where I think we saw that, and I'll also cover some of some things led by Transport Scotland that we think would be of interest to in the North East. So the next slide, Paul, is really just some of the topics that I'm going to cover today. So the next slide, I think, just on funding, and just kind of starting in that context, because of course that is kind of the big overarching issue that's facing us all. Just to say, the Scottish Government does place utmost importance and balance in its budget every year, as all public organisations do. But we are doing that in a context of kind of unprecedented challenges facing public finances. But despite that, we have managed to make the case for transport, working with the Cabinet Secretary, to bring forward a budget for transport for next year of over £4 billion for the first time to support the transport network all across Scotland. And in that, continuing to invest in key dualling programmes of the A9 and the A96, including the Nairn bypass, the ScotRail and Caledonian Sleeper rail services, access to free bus travel for almost 2.3 million people in Scotland, and investing almost 190 million in high quality active travel and bus infrastructure, sustainable travel integration, behaviour change investment to promote walking, wheeling and cycling. Oh, sorry. I think we'll go to the next one. So with regard to net zero, just a few headlines here with regard to, and they do look a lot of kind of investment figures, but since 2020, supported operators to acquire 800 zero emission buses and supporting infrastructure, and 154 capital to bring those zero emission buses from what was 20 to 800. The new model for active travel infrastructure that Nestrans have been really significantly engaged in, an improved bid process and a role for RTPs with regard to behaviour change, which is supported by funding. A rail decarbonisation action plan, which commits all passenger diesel trains to be replaced, but depending, of course, on financial decisions and the business cases to support that. As I said, a lot of investment numbers there, but we are seeing positive outcomes. The first National Transport Strategy Monitoring and Evaluation report was published in December. Of course, I've talked about the impact of the pandemic of when we published the National Transport Strategy to now, and of course that has impacted transport. But I would say the Monitoring and Evaluation report is showing positive early signs against outcomes. There was we can see a slight increase in sustainable travel, whilst of course overall travel demand is down, but that share of sustainable travel, which we're striving for across transport, is up. Next slide, Paul, thank you. One of the areas my team are engaged with RTPs and we spoke at the last chairs meeting about was car use reduction, noting that car emissions are around 40% of transport's overall emissions. And whilst of course we understand that road-based transport is essential for social and economic reasons, it's absolutely essential for the country, a level of reduction does have benefits across everything we're trying to achieve in our transport strategies and just broader priorities in terms of improving our health and well-being, our ability to provide greater road space towards alternative modes of travel, improving road safety. But evidence shows that both incentives and disincentives will be required to achieve a reduction in car use, which is of course challenging. And Just to note, in Scotland, we don't have all the levers to achieve this, and Scottish ministers are asking to engage with UK government and collectively with the devolved nations on the future of vehicle-related taxation. As I said, this is a key area which we have worked with RTPs to date, but I think is probably, for me in my area, my level of responsibility in Transport Scotland, is the key area where we want to work going forward. We did have a draft route map that was published in 2022 to achieving a 20 car kilometre reduction, and we have heard feedback that we feel that it's felt that is no longer fit for purpose in terms of moving towards publishing a final route map, and that the policy delivery set out in a route map or a delivery plan to achieving car use needs to better reflect that there's no one size fits all. Therefore, we're working with COSLA on a new approach, which has been shared with officers and perhaps some members here today, if you're members on COSLA leaders or Economy Environment Board. We're keen, as we move forward with this policy and move forward with delivery of this policy, to work with local authorities and regional transport partnerships on that, and that is going to be key to the next steps in this policy area. Thanks, Paul. Road safety, a priority for the Scottish Government, and committed to an ambitious goal of making Scotland's roads the safest in the world by 2030. Our Scotland's road safety framework envisions a future where we have the best road safety performance, and 0 deaths and injuries by 2050 is the target. Evidence from other countries, including Wales, demonstrates the transformative impact of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in reducing accidents and improving community safety. And our £4 million investment in initiatives to support 20-mile-an-hour limits is supported by comprehensive guidance on the application of that to ensure consistency and effectiveness across Scotland. You'll also be aware of the speed management review, which is out for consultation at the moment, and I think is having unprecedented responses. Next slide, Paul. Aberdeen Rapid Transit, so of course identified in the Regional Transport Strategy by Nestrans as one of the projects which provides the right solutions for the North East transport issues, but also recognised nationally. Mass transit in our biggest cities is set out as a strategic priority in the National Planning Framework and also in the Strategic Transport Projects Review 2 published in 2022. It aligns with our national priorities of taking climate action, reducing inequalities, delivering inclusive economic growth and improving health and wellbeing. As with all Scottish Government spend, future funding availability will be dependent on the outcomes of the business case work, and I know that my team received the strategic business case earlier this week. We'll be reviewing that, feeding back on that, and I'm pleased that funding is committed through the City Region deal to take that business case up to final business case. So an area of collaboration between Scottish Government and Nestrans on that. Next slide, Paul. With regard to rail enhancements, of course, there was the commitment in 2016 to the Aberdeen Central Belt Rail Corridor improvements alongside the City Region deal to be delivered within the 10-year timescale. The outline business case was considered by Scottish Government last year, and an update was given to the City Region deal committee later in the year. I think it was November. My colleagues were at committee. The decision was taken on the back of that outline business case to proceed with the rolling stock procurement. However, decisions still to be taken on the infrastructure improvements to support that, but the design works and the funding for that is fully funded this year. Next slide, please, Paul. Another Scottish Government project aligned with the City Region deal was the Lawrence Kirk Junction. Again, Scottish Government remains committed to this, and the revised road orders for that, which included the new overbridge at Oty Hill, were published and for consultation, and that closed at the end of January, currently considering those responses. But of course, we know, and you'll all be familiar with, that what a new grade separated junction in the location will do in terms of delays and road safety around Lawrence Kirk. And just to note the kind of partnership working with Transport Scotland, the local authorities and Nestrans, it's going as far back as 2015 on this project. Thanks, Paul. With regard to the A96 review, so I mentioned earlier the commitment and the kind of funding around the section Inverness to Nairn. But you'll be aware that the full corridor was subject to review as a result of the commitments in the Butte House Agreement that the Scottish Government had made. The Scottish Government position is still fully committed to the full dualling, but the results of that review of the full dualling is now out for consultation. The feedback will inform the Government's decision on the way forward, and I know that you are considering the Nestrans response to this later on the agenda. So that was a little bit of fly through of some kind of key policy areas and issues I thought were relevant, but just to finish up, I thought it would be useful to just mention areas I think actually going forward where I think we could have strengthened work in our collaboration. I've already talked about road use reduction in terms of the next steps for that policy area. Transport support in the renewables industry, obviously key for the North East, but all across Scotland, the opportunities that transport can provide to enable that growth, but also the opportunities for transport and that transition. Something we term bus futures, but this is really about, we know the decline in bus, we know it's the most used public transport, and actually for all the aims that we want to achieve with regard to net zero, with regard to tackling inequalities, how can we best support and grow the bus sector? The Bus Futures project really considers that decline, the powers in the Transport Act, the funding that goes into bus, and if there is new ways in which we can support the uptake of the powers of the Act, or the way in which the money is utilised in the system to grow that sector. And then transport to health as well. One of the areas I know that Nestran in the North East, you've been, I would say, probably one of the kind of best practice examples. So actually for us and government, how do we take some of that and grow across the rest of the country? I'm keen to hear whether you agree with these areas, whether they align with your views, or if there's anything missing, of course, as in terms of areas to move forward with. So just to finish up, I'd also like to thank Rab as well. Wishing you all the best, Rab, in your retirement. I think everything that you've contributed again to the North East, but specifically for me, that collegiate relationship that you've fostered with Transport Scotland. So thank you very much for that, and thanks to Paul for help prepare, and that's my presentation finished, and happy for questions and discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you much for that. I'll quickly jump in with my question before others just use my position. You mentioned about bus futures. I know there's been an announcement of a bus fares pilot. Would you be able to kind of talk through a little bit of that from Transport Scotland side of things in terms of how that process will move forward?
Yes, so, and I know my colleagues were speaking to Nestrans recently about that, and I know Nestrans have said we'd be keen for the North East to be considered for this pilot. So yes, be announced part of the 2025-26 budget. So my colleagues are just working through what a kind of pilot could look like, what the form of that would look like, and kind of developing advice on that and what a process might look like. So very kind of early stages for us. I'm afraid there's not much more I can say, but just pleased to hear that people are happy to engage with it and be considered. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I see a couple hands online. Councillor Doreen Mayer, if you want to come in.
Thank you. I'm substituted for today for Councillor John Cox. Thank you very much for your presentation. A couple of things that sprung to my mind immediately. Car reduction in more urbanised areas is a very is much easier, shall we say, to deliver than it is in rural areas of Aberdeenshire. We do not have the bus infrastructure, the rail infrastructure, the motorways that we have down in the central belt. So I think it would be punitive on people in this area. And when you further mention a vehicle related taxation, could you expand on what you mean by that? Because I do think, you know, we've mentioned equalities and economic growth and everything. And if it's a taxation on every car in every area, then as I say, that would be punitive. So could you just expand on that a wee bit, please?
Yes, so thank you, Councillor. So we have no proposals for a national taxation in Scotland. What I was, and apologies if it wasn't clear, Scottish Minister's position is that there's motor in taxation already. It's reserved to the UK. But actually with the change in the vehicle fleet, so a lot of that taxation is, of course, the vehicle excise duty that's paid, and there are changes to that with regard to electric vehicles, but also fuel taxation. So what our ministers are asking the UK government to work with the devolved nations and what the future of that might be, knowing that there's those declining revenues, which are going to have a substantial impact on the Treasury. So what might the future of that taxation look like? So
Okay.
not specifically with the Scotland, but actually a future of the vehicle excise duty and fuel duty.
Okay, I wasn't quite sure which that meant. So you also were, you've set out the strategy and you spoke about the Northeast being very important for the renewable sector. So that includes the ports on the A90 and then A952 corridor. So I wondered what your thoughts were on whether there would be government help to fund projects in that area.
So I would think we would consider those on a case by case basis. I think what it talked about was the importance of our investment being based on a robust business case. Of course, where something's a national development or nationally significant, that plays in terms of our priorities across Scotland. But I think what we talked about, the kind of challenge in resources, it would be really looking at the benefits of the scheme versus the cost of any scheme that was proposed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got Councillor Mason next on my list. If you,
yeah, thank you, Chair. Doreen, Councillor Mayor actually took the words out of my mouth about the car miles reduction. I think in Aberdeenshire it's going to be impossible to succeed on this. I don't see how we can. There's a lot of bus services missing. There's whole villages actually stranded without any bus service. I don't know how we're going to get around that at all. Yeah, so do we have any proposals for more bus services in Aberdeenshire? I know we seem to be replacing bus services that already exist, like the ART. That there's a good service there anyway. Is there any proposal to introduce more bus services around Aberdeenshire?
I'm afraid, Councillor, I don't know if that's the most appropriate one for me to respond to, but certainly bus network growth and some of the policies we have are aimed towards that supporting the bus sector. But specifically with regard to Aberdeenshire, I wouldn't be able to comment what Councillor Nestrans plans.
Yeah, there was another one I was wanting to ask on the trains coming in from Inverness as well. Is there a possibility we could introduce more stops for the trains coming in? We could actually bring more people into Aberdeen that way. Just an idea.
Okay, thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
Mr. Wallace, do you want to come in on maybe on the buses? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, always happy to come in on the bus. So in terms of the Aberdeenshire position and trying to make sure you'll look at the bus service provision, so that falls to ourselves along with the commercial operators. So when we see gaps in the network, identify a wider need, then we take forward proposals, as you'll be aware of. So local members will see that come through the due process. Ideally, we would like to try and look at potentially different models in the future, and I think that would be the sort of thing that potentially under that future the Bus Futures programme, that we could bring some learning on what the effectiveness of different types of arrangements. So demand responsive transport, the use of digital platforms, looking at mobility as a service as a model that I know goes on in other parts of Scotland and the UK. So in terms of whether those would be traditional services that we might look to try and trial across the North East in the future, or maybe non-traditional, I think you would find that the across Nestrans, Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City, we would be very happy to do any trials around that bus futures model to try and see how, if you can make it work in this part of the country with such a high level of car dependency and car ownership and a very dispersed population, then I think we would be going some way to tackling that 20% reduction challenge that we all have. Thank you.
I've got a list just now. It's Councillor Gregg, Councillor Radley, and Councillor MacDonald. So we'll bring in Councillor Gregg now.
Thanks, Chair. On the car use reduction policy, I think the policy has a great deal of merit, and I appreciate that that original target of 2030 was very ambitious. I think that's looking at halving car use within 5 years, which is a bold aspiration, but an important one nevertheless. And I just wondered, there was mention there of review of the target. So could that potentially be a more nuanced timescale, maybe a more flexible approach, maybe with tapering, and maybe focusing on different areas, rural, urban, and so forth? Because I think it is an important one, but we need to get it right. So some more detail would be useful. Thanks.
No, thank you, Councillor. So that links to the climate change plans. So the last target was set as part of the pathway that we set out for transport to get to net zero, and actually the interim target we had by 2030. We'll have a new climate change plan later this year. We're awaiting advice from the Committee on Climate Change. So we will be reviewing all those transport policies with those new emission envelopes that will be set to get to net zero to 2045. And yeah, we'll be setting targets and policies and making those commitments in the climate change plan aligned with that advice. Thank you. And yeah, in terms of I think that was the feedback we've had in the route map. It was it covered kind of 40 plus interventions, but I think that whilst it recognised there would be differences between urban and rural, I think all the feedback we're getting is we need to be much more specific on that, exactly what would car use reduction look like in different place-based environments.
Yeah, many thanks for that response, because I think it is important to make sure that we've got a combination of different modes of transport within the mix. So the equation should, I suppose, be more complex to meet the varying needs across the region. So that's really helpful to hear. Thank you.
Councillor Radley.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to 20 mile an hour sort of zones, our experience in the city is that perception is very different to reality. So actually they make very limited impact on journey times, but there still is that perception from the public that is a huge impact. What can Transport Scotland do to help us with the comms around the movement to 20 mile an hour zones? We understand the importance of it for safety and for all of that, but the perception out there is very different to that. And how can we start to turn around that narrative, and what support can Transport Scotland give to help us on that journey?
Yeah, so I think this is, and not just for 20 mile an hour zones, but you could apply it to a lot of different policies, which there's a tension. And I think really it's the what are the benefits of this, what the why, the rationale, and actually where it's worked well, and actually that kind of voice of experience, or the voice of someone that this is actually going to have that positive impact on, to help kind of counter the negative arguments. So I think in terms of what we can do as a national agency, well, it's that kind of reach. So if an area is finding challenges, we can always refer to where it's worked well. Of course, there's other networks for doing that, but we have that. We have and just that kind of national voice in terms of the outcomes we're trying to achieve across transport, and why this is one of the things so that supports that. So I think it is just supporting each other on the benefits, and then the evaluation, which sounds like the kind of technical word, but really where it's worked well, and actually kind of showcasing that.
Thank you. I've got one other, if that's okay, Chair. Given Aberdeen Rapid Transit is part of the STPR2 and National Planning Framework as well, what opportunities are there for each of the respective councils in sort of the Nestrans remit? What scope is there for councils to engage with Transport Scotland on larger strategic projects, which will probably require funding?
Do you mean beyond Aberdeen Rapid Transit, or so if something within, so STPR was really to set out a programme for ministers for them to say these are commitments for strategic transport infrastructure. That's not to say there might not be other projects that are strategically important, and for example, there's cases for rail stations is one that we often get within Transport Scotland, and we engage on. There's a couple of examples in the North East we're engaged in the appraisal and actually making that kind of understanding the appraisal, the robustness of the appraisal in order to give ministers advice. All of that advice is, there's lots of cases for transport investment that can be made. I think it's then the prioritisation of that. So work with people in the development of that, and then advising ministers on their kind of forward programmes.
And Councillor MacDonald, do you have a question?
A comment first, Chair, and really it was your introductory remarks about the relationships and partnership working. I think that Nestrans really has been and still continues to be an RTP which has worked for the region here in the North East, and which has worked well with partners in local government, but also with national government. And so I was pleased to hear you say that the relationship building that had maybe just slipped away a bit has now come back and is working much better. And so I think that is to be welcomed. But I do think sometimes that the national body, Transport Scotland, can come out with some of those sound bites, which at the time sound very catchy and grab the public's attention. But as we know, it does mean different things to different people in different regions. And I think that the 20% reduction in car kilometres was one of those, because it is very different in the countryside versus the city. It was always my understanding that was an average, that it would be more in some areas and less in some. And I think that's probably the nuance that you related to. So that you reminded us. I guess. I mean, you talked about every SPR2 project that was in there from ART, E96 and all the rest of it. But there is a bit of a frustration, I have to say, on some projects, and particularly having been around and heard the word Lawrence Kirk Junction for longer than I ever wanted to know. I mean, you mentioned it's almost in 10 years. It feels a lot longer than 10 years, and same with the rail enhancements. It has been a long struggle to get anything out of that deal, quite frankly, and it has shifted as time's gone on. I don't think when that money was earmarked for Aberdeen as part of the deal that we knew that it would end up where it is. But it is where it is, I have to say, and there's still quite a lot of disgruntlement around that. So I guess my question comes back perhaps to that kind of relationship communication piece that I think is really important for us here, just to say loud and clear from Transport Scotland that regional partnerships are the way to do it. I think that is the strategic way to do it in the North East. I think it works for us. And to hear, what would be your view, I suppose, on the short to medium term of the next few years of how how transport will then grow, because we all know that it takes time to put transport, big strategic transport infrastructure in place. And whilst we can do some things around smaller issues like 20's plenty and so on, I think the question is, you know, what is the big vision over the next 10 years, 10 to 20 years for the North East from a Transport Scotland perspective?
Thank you, Councillor. I think the projects that we've set out earlier, and I hear your frustration about the length of time, but these are things that are still committed to. So I would refer to those with regard to the Central Belt to Aberdeen rail improvements, the A96 review, the outcomes of that, some of the business case work that Nestrans are leading and engaging with us on Aberdeen Rapid Transit. So in terms of the infrastructure, but then of course the sustainable travel. So you've said, yes, there's things kind of to deliver locally. The active travel, I think the transformation programme, you said about the role of the region. I think in that transformation programme, we've really recognised the role in the region of delivering that sustainable travel. So an active travel, and then the restoration of bus capital funding going into next year, something that we've fought quite hard for. So there's projects for, of course, for the national agency to be progressing and engagement with the region. We absolutely see the importance of the region in delivering on our national priorities in the national transport strategy, which align with your regional priorities. And then same at a local authority level. So we very much see that's a three parties working together towards those outcomes.
I'll just jump in with one last question, just since Councillor MacDonald mentioned timing, something that kind of started picking up on particularly recently is the kind of the length of time that it can take for projects to go from first idea to actually being delivered, and that's partly down to the kind of the amount of effort that has to go into the kind of strategic phases of that. And I know it's been suggested that it can be shortcutted a little bit, but it tends to lead to legal challenge and issues. But you outline if there's maybe some work being done to maybe try and streamline that a little bit, just so we can deliver things a little bit quicker, maybe if there's any scope to streamline that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's it kind of depends on the project, I suppose. So there's the statutory processes for these major road projects, which are there to, as you said, to avoid that kind of risk of challenge and things that could actually lengthen it. And it's that robustness, of course. You know, we talk nationally as a country, but the length of time things take. Getting to kind of more projects that aren't that kind of where you're going to need compulsory purchase of land and things like that. We do get a lot of feedback on the appraisal process, the STAG process that people might hear about, the Scottish Transport Appraisal process. Again, that's sort of really about a robustness in decision making. Really, is what is the case for this project versus a whole host of other projects. You can imagine the kind of demands on the resources. But of course, we don't want to be technocratic about it, and the process to be driving delays and cost, and when we talk about it being proportionate and pragmatic, but often, we can find that a process is there, and if there's a process, people want to follow it to the letter. So I suppose that the signal from me is, and I don't want to be accused of a soundbite that doesn't mean anything, but is that we are not implementing a process for a process's sake. It's there for a reason, but of course we want that to be proportionate, and we would also be advocates of trying to shorten that. So if we can work together on that and agree on that, then I would support that and support my team in that.
Thank you very much, and I'm not seeing any other hands up. You're more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, and otherwise we'll move on to.
Thank you, Chair.
Yep, thank you very much, and thank you. We'll move on to 3.1 budget 24-25 budget matters, and Jennifer Anderson, do you want to take us through that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. This report is to provide the board with an update on. Don't have my mic on. Yeah. I'm not on Teams, but
It might just be.
move it away a bit. It's not got a card. If I move it away, does that help? Yeah. Try again. Is that better? No.
So, laptop on.
For folk online, it's just a wee pause while we figure out the issue with the microphone.
Is that feed? That's this one's not feeding back. Do you want to swap seats? Those two quite often feedback.
Apologies for that. That's better. This report is to provide the board with an update on the budget monitoring and forecast outturn position for the current financial year and to consider any issues that may arise. Appendix 1 sets out a summary statement of income and expenditure to the end of December 2024, and this shows spend of almost £3.5 million. The forecast outturns are also shown and have been updated to reflect some projects that are known to be coming in under budget or not progressing this financial year, and this is the basis for some of the variants and carry forward requests that are proposed. Appendix 2 gives a more detailed breakdown of the claims to the end of Q3 for the individual projects being funded via the People in Place grant and their forecast outturns. This highlights that there's some predicted underspend as well, but a number of proposals have been submitted to Transport Scotland as alternatives to maximise use of the grant, and this has been accepted in principle. Appendix 3 contains the variant proposals that are being presented for consideration, and Appendix 4 then sets out the projects where a continuation of funding from this financial year to next is being requested, along with a short comment as to the particular reason for each request. The board have been asked to note the monitoring position and forecast presented in Appendix 1, note the monitoring position and forecast for the People in Place projects in Appendix 2, approve the variants set out in Appendix 3, and approve the continuation of funding to next financial year to complete approved projects presented in Appendix 4. Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions on this report.
Thank you for that. Do we have any questions? I'm not seeing any hands up in the chamber or online. If not, are we happy to agree the recommendations as you've read out? Good. Thank you very much. And we'll move on to the point 2 on your audit plan, which is Gina Wright. I'll pass on to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is to inform the board of the 24-25 annual audit plan, which sets out the audit work to be undertaken to provide an opinion on the Nestrans financial statements. The external auditors from Grant Thornton are in attendance today to go over the audit plan, which is included as Appendix 1 with details of the audit timing and fee. Responses to the informing the audit risk assessment document is also included as Appendix 2. There are 2 recommendations for the board. One, to note the audit plan provided by the external auditors, and also to note the responses given to the informing the audit risk assessment document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Anyone wanting to come in on that? Nope. Are we happy to read the recommendations as they are in the report?
Yeah,
The
auditors.
Yep. Angela, Pierre, are you wanting to come in on anything at all for that?
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I'll just present a brief summary and then probably just hand over to Andrew just to maybe take you through a little more of the detail, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the audit plan starting on page 25 of your packs. As I say, I intend to just kind of briefly overview it. In summary, we've completed our planning work as far as we can at this stage, appreciating we complete some of our work once the planning is complete for the council. We've also carried out any interim testing we can at this point, and we also thank officers for their support and responses to date. Our audit plan sets out the risks for the audit as well as setting out our materiality. There are no significant changes in approach or our risks from previous years, and confirm that the wider scope we're still required to carry out the more limited reporting, appreciating the size of the board. Our plan highlights the revised accounting standard for IFRS 16 on leases, where some work is required by finance as well as the audit team for 24-25 onwards to address these revised requirements. When we understand the amount of work required for this standard, it's to note that this element would be subject to additional audit fee, appreciating that revised standards are not part of any base audit fee. I also want to note that we've discussed with officers the timeline for the final audit, and appreciating the timing of our work will be finalised closer to the time, we have flagged at this early stage that we will be intending to bring our final report to your November board. At this point, I'll hand over to Andrew to just take you through a little more of the detail, and we're both happy to take questions at the end. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Angela. I don't intend to go through the audit plan page by page, but I would like to highlight the following key points. Page 35 of the committee papers, this details the significant audit risks we've identified during our audit planning work. Management override controls is a standard risk that is relevant to all audits and is required by ISA 240. We've also identified a risk of fraud and expenditure recognition, and our year-end testing will focus on cut-off arrangements. This basically means we will focus our testing on transactions around the year-end. Nestrans participates in the North East Scotland Pension Fund, a local government pension scheme. We have identified a significant risk in relation to the valuation of the pension liability. The risk is due to the level of estimation and judgment in the calculation of the pensions figures by Nestrans actuary. The final risk identified relates to IFRS 16, the right of use assets. In line with the Code of Audit Practice for Local Authority Accounting, Nestrans is going to be required to adopt IFRS 16 leases. As Angela mentioned, 24-25 will be the first year Nestrans will account for leases in line with IFRS 16, and as part of our year-end testing, we will assess the existence, accuracy and completeness of the right use assets and the associated lease liabilities. Additional information on IFRS 16 can be seen at page 72 of the committee papers, including a list of questions bodies should be asking themselves to ensure that all potential leases are considered and identified. Page 41 of the committee papers provides details on the interim audit testing we are completing. We're covering 5 main areas, and completing this testing early will provide us further efficiencies later in the audit. Page 43 of the committee papers provides details on the materiality figures for the audit. Our planning materiality has been set as 2.5% of 23-24 gross expenditure and results in a materiality total of £138,000. Our performance materiality has been set at 75% of that planning materiality figure and results in a total of £103,000. And our clearly trivial amount has been set at £6,900. These amounts are the highest levels we're able to set as part of our audit methodology, and we will revisit these at year-end when we've received the 24-25 accounts. At page 49, I'd also just like to point out that the wider scope exemption applies to our audit in Nestrans. So in line with the requirement of the code, we have assessed the risk factors related to Nestrans and concluded that Nestrans qualifies for this exemption in 2024-25. The gross revenue, gross assets and gross liabilities in Nestrans are not expected to exceed £10.2 million, and that's the limit set out in Audit Scotland's guidance. Furthermore, we've not identified any wider scope risk beyond financial sustainability that would require further consideration during the audit. And just like to note as well that we've reviewed financial sustainability as part of our audit planning and have not identified a significant audit risk. At page 54 of the committee papers, the plan provides details on our audit timeline. We have completed the majority of our audit planning work, but we do have some areas outstanding which relate to work on IT systems. We also have some controls work on both pensions and IFRS 16 that we need to complete later in the year, as it's currently too early to finalise this testing. But if any additional risks are identified from this work, it will be communicated to Nestrans and confirmed in our annual report. As Angela mentioned, our final accounts audit work will take place in October 2025, and it is our intention to present our audit report to this committee in November. The actual basis for the audit fee is set out at page 58. The baseline fee for the year has been set by Audit Scotland, and as mentioned by Angela, due to the additional work required for IFRS 16, there may be an additional audit fee required later in the year. Other than that, that concludes our summary of the audit plan, and we're happy to take any questions on any of the items included. Before that, just really like to thank Tina, the rest of the finance team, for their help throughout the audit planning process. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Wallace, Ms. Pieri. I'm not seeing any hands in the chamber. I'm not seeing any hands online. So can I thank you both and for your work on this, and I'll pass back on, and we'll move now. I'm assuming we're happy to agree the recommendation. So again, yep, having agreed that, we'll move on to 3.3 Nestrans draft reserves policy, and I'll pass back on to Tina Wright online. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks approval from the board to agree the proposed reserves policy for the financial year 25-26. As you may recall, Nestrans functions were initially determined by the Transport Scotland Act 2005. However, a 2007 Audit Scotland bulletin highlighted that the Act did not permit regional transport partnerships to generate a surplus or deficit, preventing the addition to reserves. This was rectified by the Transport Scotland Act 2019, allowing regional transport partnerships to hold and contribute to a general fund reserve. The proposed policy is detailed in Appendix 1, and if approved, will establish a minimum unallocated general fund reserve of 200,000. Plans for drawing on any unallocated reserves exceeding this amount will be developed for consideration at the next board meeting in April, when the confirmed budget allocations for 25-26 will be known. There are 3 recommendations for the board: to approve the reserves policy as set out in Appendix 1, to agree the policy being published on the Nestrans website, and to instruct plans to be developed for drawing of any unallocated reserves in excess of the agreed minimum general fund reserve and brought to the next board in April for consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I see Councillor MacDonald. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, Chair, how we landed on the figure of 200,000 for the reserve minimum.
Ms. Wright?
Yeah, it was in discussion with the Treasurer of Nestrans, and looking at a few scenarios. The 200,000 is approximately 25% of core revenue funding, so felt a reasonable amount, but with review expected every year, because this is the first year we've done it, to see if that is a reasonable amount. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other hands for questions. Are we happy to agree the recommendations as they are in the paper? Great. Thank you very much. We'll move on to 3.4, Treasury Management Strategy Statement for 24-25. And again, Ms. Wright, if you could take us through that.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks approval from the board to agree the proposed Treasury Management Strategy for the financial year 25-26. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy Code of Practice requires that the board sets out its Treasury Management Strategy for borrowing and investment each year. The responsibility lies with the Nestrans Board. However, there is a service level agreement with Aberdeenshire Council, who assist in the day-to-day duties of the Treasury management activities. The strategy is set out in Appendix 1 and 2, and Appendix 3 shows a summary of the investment activities for the 9 months to the end of December 2024. There are 2 recommendations for the board: to approve the revised Treasury Management Strategy as set out in Appendix 1 and 2, and to note the investment activity in the 9 months to the end of December 2024. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. And again, I don't see any hands up in the chamber or online. Are we happy to agree the recommendations for that? Good. Thank you very much. And now 3.5, draft budget proposals, and I'll pass on to Jenny Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. This report asks the board to approve budgets for next financial year, subject to anticipated funding levels being confirmed, and to agree an indicative 5-year plan covering the period up to and including 2029-30. The budget proposals for next financial year have been prepared on the basis of indicated funding levels from both councils and the assumption that the Scottish Government revenue grant will remain at the same level as last year. The proposals may need further consideration by the board when the actual allocations are confirmed, once the councils have set their budgets and once an offer of grant has been received from the Scottish Government. The report also notes that proposals have been submitted for Nestrans to again administer a People in Place programme next year, and this is the subject of a separate report on today's agenda. Confirmation of the actual grant award offer will be provided to a future board when known. Nestrans has worked with officers from both councils to develop the budget proposals, and the proposed coordination and project development budget is presented in Appendix 1. The core costs reflect the estimated running costs of Nestrans, and although the director's post will become vacant shortly, it has been costed in full for the year ahead, along with an allowance being made for an increase in salaries of up to 3%. The proposals also include the requested carry forward of funding from the current financial year that was requested in the earlier Budget Matters report, which has now been approved. The budget proposals for next year's strategic investment programme are based on the council allocations within their 5-year programmes that were approved in 2024. This indicated funding next year to Nestrans of £1.6 million, although the exact allocations are yet to be considered and confirmed. As the external audit report recommended that Nestrans consider including a level of interest income in the budget setting process, the investment interest of approximately £200,000 earned this year has been added when developing the budget proposals. The proposals also reflect the funding from the current financial year that was requested in the Budget Matters report for continuation, and this has been agreed and brings the total available next financial year to almost £2.5 million. The proposed strategic investment programme for 25-26 is presented in Appendix 2. The pink-blue shading used within the appendix represents the local authority delivering each project, with pink denoting Aberdeen City Council and blue denoting Aberdeenshire Council, although there is also one project in green, and that represents a commission that would be led by Nestrans. It was also a previous audit recommendation that Nestrans should prepare a medium-term financial strategy covering at least 5 years. This has again been developed with input from council colleagues. The draft proposals for the 5-year coordination and project development budget were based on assumed continuation of funding from the councils and Scottish Government, and the draft proposals are shown in Appendix 3. This highlights that even without inflationary increases being applied to some budget items such as accommodation and support costs, that without an increase in future funding allocations, then significantly less project development work will be able to be undertaken. The draft proposals for the 5-year strategic investment programme were also based on the assumption that funding will continue to be provided by both councils at the same levels as included within their 5-year plans approved in 2024, and the proposed 5-year programme is contained in Appendix 4. It should be noted that the 5-year programmes will not be an agreed spending plan, as they will be subject to future budget and partner agreements, but it does indicate the potential profiling of expenditure during the 5-year period and can be considered as a basis for preparing annual budgets and funding requests to 2030. The board has been asked to approve the 25-26 budgets with programmes as detailed in Appendices 1 and 2, subject to anticipated funding levels being confirmed and making any appropriate adjustments following the board's consideration. Note the funding proposals for active travel behaviour change associated with the Scottish Government's People in Place programme for 25-26 have been developed and are discussed in a separate report, and that any grant award received will be reported when known. And approve the general 5-year programme of works detailed in Appendices 3 and 4 as a basis for future year annual budgets. And I'm happy to try and answer any questions in this report. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I see Councillor Black had her hand up well in advance, so I'll bring her in first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for that report and the thorough report in front of us. My question was around the indicative 5-year plan, looking at the summary there on page 121. It's quite worrying to me, some of the project work that looks like, you know, we've got spend for this year, but then there is absolutely nothing planned at the moment. And I appreciate it's indicative and can change for the next 4 years, which would include rail what led the decisions to make those zero spend lines?
I think some of the later year projects are a bit more vague, so we have grouped some of them, sort of the active travels, without being project specific. Some of the reducing emission ones, I think there's been Scottish Government money for the vehicle charger, so it won't need so much support. So there are differing reasons, I think, for the different projects that have dropped out. This was prepared in partnership with council officers as well, that are aware of their own programmes and capital programmes that they're developing. And this was seen as being the best balance, but it will be, as I say, brought forward each year on an annual basis.
Thank you for that. Colin Alanak online saw his hand up.
Sorry, I just found my microphone. Yeah, sorry if I'm going into the weeds in this, but on the Appendix 2, our biggest spend in 2025 is 270k on the A92 Merker to Black Dog active travel route. Are we actually going to spend that? I thought that had been shelved because of the costs. I mean, I know this is only this is Nestrans portion of it, but is that project actually going ahead in 25-26?
Nestrans had a contribution to it before, and it has been getting progressed by Aberdeen City Council. I don't know if David wants to come in, but I think they'd been using AWPR mitigation money, and I think it's now at the stage of nearing construction.
I'll bring in Mr. Dunn for this then.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can confirm the work is ongoing on that project through the capital team. I can't confirm exactly dates and times, and it will obviously be subject to the tender process, but we will be able to report back to both the City Council and to this committee on that.
Thank you very much. Do you have any follow-up? Yep, thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you very much. It was really to follow on from Councillor Black, and on page, where is it, 126, where we have all the actual categories, if you like, in our strategic plan, and there are a lot more zeros in there, I guess. And I just wondered if at some point, if the board could get maybe a bigger oversight, perhaps on things that have been, and it brings in what Dawn was saying about things that are done on a yearly basis, and you can see that things have actually happened in the past as well. And I just wonder if that might be helpful for the board at some point to see when some of those projects, we've got art in there, for example, and we know that there's stuff coming up about that, and I think it'd just be useful to get that bigger strategic oversight.
Yeah, I did debate whether I should show every single line that's in the RTS if there was no expenditure. I just weren't sure whether to show them all or not. I thought it was helpful. See, I mean, some of the lines here, and this is just Nestrans funding, so obviously, like the art is being funded through City Region deals, so it is funded, but it's no net cost to Nestrans budget. So there is work carrying on. It's just, this is purely the Nestrans capital budget. And also there's a lot of lines here that don't have capital spend, that maybe have revenue spend in the next budget. So I thought it was more helpful to show that there maybe are some strands that don't have as much funding, but it may be that they are funded through other partners and not contributed to by Nestrans. I think Paul's wanting to come in and add to that, are you?
Yeah, thanks. We have a commitment to bring a sort of a delivery plan to the board, and I think that delivery plan would help sort these out, because sometimes when you're looking at specific budget allocations, you're not able to spread that allocation across several headings, and some of the projects we've put them into one heading, but they actually hit 3 or 4 of those different objectives going forward. And I think the delivery plan that we're planning on bringing forward to the board, and which could be read alongside the 5-year plan, will help provide that narrative. I hope that helps. Councillor MacDonald for the chair. Thank you.
I think that sounds like a way forward and would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all that. I'm not seeing any more hands online or in the chamber. Agree. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to 4.1, the Director's Report. Mr Dixon.
Thank you very much. As you say, 4.1 is the Director's Report. It includes the liaison that we've been having, a number of meetings between regional transport partnerships with the Scottish Government, Transport Scotland and others. They're listed there, the main meetings that we have had over the last couple of months, but there are a couple that I would want to particularly bring to your attention, if I may. Councillor Turner chaired a very successful meeting of the Regional Transport Partnership chairs at the Douglas Hotel in early December, which I thought went really well, and it was really nice to have people in and around Aberdeen seeing some of the work that has gone on here over the last couple of years. There are also minutes of both Health and Transport Action Plan Steering Group and of the Bus Alliance, which are brought for members' information. But in particular, the most recent meeting of the Bus Alliance, which was held on the 30th of January, we did get the opportunity to talk about, and it has been touched on already, but the Scottish Government's proposal for a £2 fare cap in a region. So that was discussed at the Bus Alliance. I think it's fair to say that there were enthusiastic people around the table and maybe less enthusiastic people who had some reservations about how it might work, how sustainable it might be in the long term. But I think there's a question there for the Nestrans Board, whether you actually want to set out your stall as we think this would be good in the North East. And this is maybe an opportunity to do so. So at the moment, there is ongoing discussions at officer level, but it's whether you feel that's something that you want to instruct us to get actively involved in, or whether we continue until we know a little bit more about it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'd hope we can add in a recommendation about that instruction to look to support a bus pilot scheme coming to the North East, if that's possible. Do we have any questions around the chamber? I'm not seeing any hands online or in the room. If members are happy, apologies, I'm just losing my place. If members are happy to do so, are we happy to agree it with the addition? The board, just try and get the wording up, that the board agrees to support efforts for a £2 fare cap pilot to come to the North East of Scotland. Great. Agreed. Thank you very much for that. And we'll move on to 5.1, Active Travel Update, People in Place Programme 2024-25 Q3 report, and that's John Barron.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Members will recall the previous People in Place updates that I've reported upon throughout 2024, and in the first part of a trio of papers on all things People in Place, I'll now briefly take you through progress at Nestrans, predominantly delivered and supported by our partners, has made towards the end of Q3. As part of the range of supporting processes and measures that Nestrans has put in place, we require partners to give formal project updates on a provided template in order to help capture exactly what progress has been made. The partner submissions are thoroughly reviewed, together with the accompanying financial claims, edited where required and collated into a single Nestrans programme-wide report using the same template to Transport Scotland at the end of each quarter. Q1 and Q2 submissions were reported to board at meetings last year, and the report for Q3 is attached as an appendix to this paper. This report, like those that have preceded it, I think provides clear evidence of the hard work of all our partners, what they are respectively and collaboratively delivering upon, and provides some tremendous examples of the inspiring work that is actively taking place in North East communities. I'd like to formally record my thanks to all those who played a part in helping with such overwhelmingly positive impacts. But whilst there's lots and lots of great work being delivered, we don't intend to hesitate or stand still, as I think we'll all agree there's still so much work yet to do. As members will doubtless acknowledge, there are lots and lots of moving parts to all of this. and the building of the programme from a standing start only just over, slightly over a year ago, continues at pace. The pressing aim for myself and colleagues for the remainder of this year's programme is to continue with a robust governance and oversight from both the fiscal and delivery perspective across all the separate projects, aiming to ensure the best possible and most sensible spend of every single penny that has been awarded to Nestrans for the programme. Clearly, another significant part of the moving pieces to all of this has been the preparations we've made 25-26, and that'll be updated upon in the next paper. And as we all too rapidly approach the end of this year's programme, members will recall that I've previously mentioned the showcase event that we'll be hosting in Huntly on the 12th of March. All board members, substitute members, advisors have already been invited to this, and representatives from all our project partners will also be in attendance, along with Transport Scotland, with some interactive, practical and physical presentations and displays from some of the activities centred, for example, in preschool, early school, bike reuse, repair, easier access to bikes, and an adapted cycling bothia that aims to make cycling fully accessible and inclusive. And as I've outlined previously, there will be plenty of bikes available for your use on the day. I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have on the report itself, or indeed on any other aspects of the current programme.
Thank you for that. I'm not. On the Huntly event, I'll make a note. I saw the invite for that for Wednesday the 12th, and I was so keen to turn up. I turned up a month early for that, so I'll hopefully see you again next month. I don't see any questions. Oh, sorry, apologies, Councillor McDonald.
It was more of a comment, Chair. I think, I mean, we've said it before, this is a great bit of work. It's great that we've got somebody from Transport Scotland in the room to actually hear firsthand. And it really is a piece of work, I have to say, that was taken from a standing start to, 60 in 3 seconds or whatever the analogy is on a bike. I don't know. I can't even remember if I've put in to go on the 12th, but I'll definitely be there as well, John. So thank you for all you do for that, and thank you to the partners who deliver so well for us on this project at pace. Thank you.
Not seeing. Oh, apologies online. Yep, Colin, Mr. Alan Axer.
Sorry, it's not about 5.1, it's about 5.2. I'm going to have to recluse myself from the next thing because I'm also involved with Scottish Cycling, who are one of the recipients. So I'm just going to head off just now. If John could text me afterwards when it's safe for me to come back in, that would be great.
Yep, thank you for that. Just before we do that, we're happy to agree the recommendation. We have to agree 5.1 and its recommendations. Agreed. Thank you very much, and I'll let Mr. Alanak nip away until we move on to 5.2. Active and sustainable travel update, people in place programme for 2025-26. Caroline Hood.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. So the purpose of this paper is to follow on from what John has just presented and to provide the board with an update on the planning and preparation of the Nestrans 2025-26 People and Place programme. Members will recall from a previous update at the November board meeting that for this coming financial year, Transport Scotland has broadened the purpose of the programme and it will now incorporate sustainable travel. And also to note that as with previous years, local authorities have also been allocated a direct funding award, the Local Authority People and Place Award, which they can use at their own discretion to focus on capacity and capability building in the realm of active travel behaviour change to complement the region-wide programme. Nestrans has administered the 2025-26 People in Place programme development process for the region through expressions of interest, and these were submitted by our prospective partner organisations to Nestrans in early January 2025, and this was following advert of this programme on the Nestrans website in December 2024. Very pleased to report that following this deadline, a total of 53 expressions of interest were received from 32 separate organisations, and these bids totalled in excess of £5.5 million. All submitted projects were deemed competent for consideration. The goal of our expression of interest process was to ensure that Nestrans, as far as possible, ensured that the process was open, transparent, equitable, and importantly, available to every organisation that could meet the required standards. In order to assess the proposals, we established 2 separate groups, a working group and a decision panel. Finally, to further support the open and transparent nature of this process, an independent assessor was asked to review the proposed programme against the Transport Scotland guidance and also the overall people in place and their concluding remark was that, and I quote, the Nestrans People in Place programme evaluation process is underpinned by clear and logical principles and effective in identifying strong and transformative projects. It is fit for purpose and an example of good practice. On the 30th of January, 2025, Transport Scotland confirmed the award to Nestrans to deliver the 2025-26 programme was £2,168,117. This comprised £1,433,611 capital and £734,506 revenue. It's important to be precise. On the 3rd of February 2025, Nestrans submitted the proposed 2025-26 programme to Transport Scotland for review, and these projects are set out for your information in Appendix 1, page 213 of the board papers. All applicants were advised of the outcome of their expression of interest as well. We also wish to note that within the proposed projects is a ring-fenced community fund, and this comprises 4% of the programme award, and this is intended to support community-focused projects. 3 projects that fit these criteria and which were recommended for support featured on the list of projects submitted to Transport Scotland. It is Nestrans' intention, pending the outcome of today, to issue a further public request to constituted community groups to apply for funding week commencing the 24th of February. And it is recommended that the board note the work that's taken place around building the People in Place programme for 2025-26, approve the publication of the application process for community projects, and also to approve the projects that are set out in Appendix 1 as proposed projects that are taken forwards. Thank you, Chair, and I'm very happy to answer any questions on this report.
Thank you for that. It's like welcome to hear from what's there. I'm not seeing any hands in the chamber or online. Are we happy to agree that report? Agreed. Thank you very much. And we'll move on now to proposal for People in Place Programme Manager. Mr. Finch, do you want to take us through that?
Thank you very much, Chair. The purpose of the report is to seek board approval to progress with the establishment of a new People in Place Programme Manager post within the Nestrans staff structure. This post will be funded on an annual basis from within an allocation from the Nestrans People in Place Grant Award, as we've just discussed in the previous item of the agenda. We just wanted to make this explicit and clear. Councillor MacDonald has already recognised, as has Mr. Barron, the amount of significant work we've had to do from a standing start pretty much from this time last year to establish the 24-25 programme, and on top of that the work that we've been doing since autumn on the establishment of the 25-26 programme. I think I remember when I was addressing this committee in February that we highlighted the risk of resources and the amount of bandwidth that the People in Place programme would take up within the Nestrans establishment. We are now managing a grant programme of almost over £2 million for the next coming year, of degrees of complexity from large organisations to small community grants, and also complying with Transport Scotland's requirements for monitoring, evaluation, and being robust in terms of the audit processes and the grant funding processes as well. Recognising the amount of work that this has required, and with the experience of a year's seeing it in practice, we considered that the establishment of this post would help to robustly deliver this programme, de-risk the activity in terms of Nestrans activity, and we would be funding it sustainably from the grant allocation that comes through on an annual basis. There are various other details within the board report as well, I think the key thing is we would, if we were happy with this recommendation, we would then liaise with Aberdeenshire Council's HR team to complete the job profile, job analysis questionnaire and other requirements of their post-establishment process prior to progressing to a recruitment process, aiming for this financial year to get that in place. Financial implications are we have outlined a provision of £70,000 revenue to fund this post. We believe at the current state that would be appropriate with all the additional on costs associated with fulfilling a post, but there is ability within the programme to adjust that as appropriate to fit the recommendation to the board that we approved the establishment of a people and place programme manager post within the establishment of Nestrans, approve the subsequent recruitment of a people and place programme manager and support the allocation of £70,000 revenue in the future year programme and commensurate values in future years of the programme to fund the post. Thank you very much, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Black.
Thank you. Just a point of clarity, on page 216 3.4, you've actually got written fixed term posts initially for the period to the 31st of March 2025. I'm assuming that's a typo and it should be 2026. Thank you.
You're correct, Councillor Black. Apologies for that.
Yep, do you have any other follow-ups? Nope, that's grand. I'm not seeing any other hands up. Are we happy to agree the recommendations from the report? Good. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the 5.4, A90 North, A952, Ellen to Peterhead and Fraserburgh appraisal update. Mr. Finch, do you want to take on? Carry, take us through that, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to update the board on the progression of work on the A90, A952, Ellen to Peterhead, Fraserburgh study, and present for approval the detailed options appraisal report. The study has focused on short to medium term interventions on this corridor to complement timescales associated with the North East Investment Zone proposals and other near-term funding opportunities. We have previously brought to this board in June 2023 the case for change and the preliminary options appraisal report. We've got away then taking that to the next stage of the detailed appraisal. We're pleased to present the detailed appraisal to the board at this meeting. The full report was uploaded to the members area and hopefully members have been able to access that as appropriate, but we have appended to this report the executive summary going forward. We have assessed a number of short to medium term interventions on the corridor, which will respond to safety concerns, development management concerns arising from land use proposals in the vicinity, particularly in and around housing at Mintlaw, which is very closely associated with constraints of Toll of Burness. But also importantly and strategically, we're trying to ensure that we continue to support the strategic growth and investment opportunities that are occurring at this time, particularly in the Peterhead and the Fraserburgh area with this study. So there's several elements to it going forward. We have assessed improvements at Ellen South Roundabout, Ellen North Roundabout, Wyther Park and Ride, improvements at Toll of Burness, improvements at the Cortes Junction, which is the northerly roundabout where the A952 meets the A90 going up to Fraserburgh. We've investigated improvements at the Chain Bridge to the north of Peterhead, which was flagged to us as a potential development constraint, particularly for the energy industry. We've looked at wider measures on the A90 and the A952 corridor, rationalising access roads and improving opportunities for safe overtaking in that area as well. And we've also looked at more community level improvements like waiting areas, safer bus stops, crossing areas where the route bypasses or goes through particular villages. Many of these improvements are in line with the essence of the interventions which were set out in STPR2. Ms. Brown's already talked about that. When we went to STPR2, we were not the dualling of the route was not included within that programme, but safety, operational efficiency elements were included. So we focused on those areas, particularly for these short to medium term interventions. The economic appraisal of the preferred package that's come out is very encouraging, with positive cost to benefit ratios and affordability assessments as well around junction improvements that I've listed at Ellen South, Ellen North and Tolworth Burness and Cortes Junction, but also for proportionate interventions in the communities. Some of the other elements are slightly less affordable, but are still worth continuing to investigate, and that include overtaking improvements, climbing lanes, and some of that access rationalisation as well. We have taken the report to the roads authorities. Aberdeenshire Council are the roads authority, and they've been included within the client group, and their input has been particularly useful as we have worked through the implications of speed management and better enforcement in those areas. We've also taken the report to Transport Scotland. They have come back and they've confirmed that they will be having detailed comments, but the comments that they have for us are more matters of detail that can be taken up perhaps at the next stage of design or outline business case. But we will receive those and we will consider them. But the indication at this stage is they would not fundamentally change the outcomes of the report going forward. As a reminder, the work is fully funded in the development phase by the Aberdeen City Region Deal Strategic Transport Appraisal, and that is funded by both Scottish Government and the UK Government. And also taking it forward to the next steps as well, we've also have a funding allocation within the programme to take a number of the proposals forward to the detailed design and outline business case, seeking to make best availability of that funding whilst it still remains for the next 2 years. And we've also taken the initial steps for procurement clearance within Aberdeenshire Council so that we can seamlessly move on to that design and development stage for the most promising interventions. The recommendations are to note the recent progress on the study, to approve the key outcomes of the detailed options appraisal and the publication of the report on the Nestrans website, to approve the options as set out in table paragraph 3.7 as the preferred package and the progression of these to outline business case, and agree that the options set out in paragraph 3.8 have a merit and should be progressed, and should resources permit or should the case for their development intensify, and we can include those as we go forward. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor Black.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for the thorough introduction there. I was absolutely delighted to see this report coming before us, and I've read it thoroughly alongside the full appraisal report. Can I just ask on the back of what you've said about the finance being in place for the development, and there is funding available in the next 2 years to take forward for design and business case, what's our timeline like for then progressing further, just so that our constituents have an idea of how long it's going to be, and especially at the Tolworth Burness, how long it's going to be until improvements will be made?
Yes, a very good and appropriate question, Councillor Black. Thank you very much. I guess what we need to understand is that different interventions may have different delivery pathways to achieving those. For example, at Ellen South roundabout and Ellen North roundabout, there are elements of that which may be linked to future development contributions coming through the local development plan. So they may in part be time related to how that development goes forward and the subsequent negotiations that may or may not occur around it. But there are linkages that have already been established in supplementary guidance to those. So that is one aspect. At Tolworth Burness, there is an element of future development applications coming forward, but there is also a very strong link at that location to future proposals for opportunities that may arise out of the investment zone project that's happening at Peterhead, because there is a capital pot available associated with that establishment. Now, the timing for the establishment of the investment zone is, there is a programme, but it depends on the interaction with UK government, HMRC, and the various complicated gateway processes that are going forward. So I guess that would be a caveat there, but I do see that as a short to medium term intervention. And there are other funding sources available for capital interventions in that area, and the size of the capital required to implement it may well fit into that capital availability. So I have a degree of confidence that we're looking at a short to medium term implementation timescale, but it is a long and windy road with lots of uncertainties ahead of us. Other aspects as well could fit into that envelope, like Cortes Junction, which is relatively affordable, but it would no doubt be an external funding application or a look to the political process via Transport Scotland. Some of the larger route action programmes may be a longer term campaigning job to take that one forward. I hope that's clear in terms of my answer.
Just for a point of clarity, can you define a short to medium term?
I think we've set out a horizon of around 10 years for medium, around 5 years for short would probably be my aspiration. But
yep. Thank you for that. I've got on my list Councillor Mayor, Councillor Mason, and then Mr. Alanak. So Councillor Mayor.
Thank you. So option 3.9 of the sort of flyover coming from the A952, I might understand that has been completely discounted and there is no chance that that will be brought forward as an option, even should other funding pots come in.
I think that would be difficult to justify on a business case basis on the work that we've undertaken related to the cost of it, but also related to the economic benefit that delivers, particularly when that's compared to the performance of the roundabout junction in that location. So yes, we have looked at it, but we have set it aside as a recommendation from the detailed appraisal going forward.
Okay. Although I can understand the finances of it, it's quite disappointing because I think we have 3 roundabouts in very short space of time, which will, I fear, cause even more disruption. But thank you for all your work you've done in this. I would also urge that right-hand turning lanes and I'm not sure the correct term for them, but overtaking opportunities be expanded down the A952 towards Fraserburgh from the Tola Burness, and also on the A90 from Fraserburgh, from the Tola Burness to Peterhead. And I think that going to the government, because the A90 is after all a Transport Scotland road, to main trunk road, and working with them to see if we can source funding, as you've already said in your introduction, that corner is integral to their hopes for renewables future. But thank you very much, and I look forward to hopefully seeing some progress on this in the very near future. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Mr. Finch, do you want to offer any comments on that?
I think they were well observed comments by Councillor Mayor, and again, I think we broadly agree with the direction of the content of that, particularly when we recognise the importance that Fraserburgh may well have future in terms of the movement of renewables, the future energy transition in that particular part of the world, and some of the significant work the Scottish Southern Energy are doing in that part of the world as well. So yes, there are specific infrastructure requirements if we're going to achieve a just transition in that corner of the country. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mason.
Yes, thank you. On the other proposal, it came up with the on the Ellen South roundabout, a bus lane. How I can't work out the logic on that. I've been up in that roundabout quite a number of times on both a bus and a car, and I've never had any congestion at that point. The congestion seems to come later on, either in Ellen or the next roundabout. I just wonder if is there any logic between actually putting a bus lane, or is that not on the cards now?
I believe that the proposal before us is Ellen South is, to improve interconnectivity, provide a bus lane on the southern arm.
Yeah.
There can be a peak time queuing and that can hold the bus up at that particular location. Let's investigate it at the next stage of the design, the detailed design, and let's see if that can be delivered. If when we come to the more detailed engineering design, it doesn't wash its face, where we can do that more detailed option assessment at that point. I think it's worthwhile proposal investigating it at this point in time, and referring that into that deliverability assessment, Councillor Mason.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
And again, if there can be peak time queues at that location. So if there's anything that we can do, which is proportionate.
I agree. I've never really had any problems coming up there.
Okay.
I'm up there
Quite
almost every other day, sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Probably there is a case in the next the roundabout towards the A948, going on to the A948. However, I'm disappointed that you said that the Tull of Burness flyover has been, the free flow traffic has been discarded. I thought that looked like a good idea. Something drastic is going to have to be done at that point, I think. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll take Mr. Alanak in now.
Aye, thanks. I agree with Councillor Mason. The bottleneck on the south is actually when you get into Ellen rather than at the roundabout. So I don't see a bus lane there would make any difference, but that'll come out in the detailed design. My thoughts were about prioritisation. The mention of 10 years medium term for some of this work. I understand that it has to tie in with other funding, but I think the issue, the safety issue, is Tull of Burness as far as I see it. It's that turn there is a nightmare for any drivers, and we are continually having incidents at that. 10 years does seem a long time to try and solve that problem. And I think if there's anything that we should be doing, we should be looking at the priorities of each of these things. The South Ellen one is not a priority. The North Ellen one is maybe a priority because of the bottleneck at there. But the safety priority is definitely Tull of Burness.
Yes, indeed. And I think whilst we're on the appraisal and the design development stage, we are working in parallel with that. I think it is also to think about also the other work going on in parallel to try and line up different funding sources so that when that design is available, we can quickly sign off the outline business case and hopefully make a persuasive case to Transport Scotland to move to that next stage of implementation, depending on how that works out. I guess we have to do what we can with what we've got for the moment, but keep our eyes on the wider prize, but keep on progressing some of those parallel elements which are as important as the technical design and the costings work to deliver Tull of Burness. I think the whole of North East Scotland recognises the importance of addressing issues at that junction. I recall the Aberdeenshire-led safety seminar that was held in October, which many board members were at as well. So yes, I think there's a momentum there, and we need to keep on working as hard as we can to achieve that goal sooner as possible going forward. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you. The North East Investment Zone governance proposals have been moving forward, and I did note that, and I did wonder at the time that Nestrans was not actually on the programme board, but it's not. But my question is really around how Nestrans is going to get its voice around transport heard loud and clearly in that decision-making and governance process of the investment board, programme board, it's called.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. At the moment, Nestrans are included in the tax in one of the working groups of that group. So we're around the table, we're having our voices and we're putting our ideas into that gateway for discussions, and we're taking it for, I guess, the actual nuts and the bolts of how what effectively will be a industrial zone management for tax purposes. The Nestrans element to that is potentially tangential, but I think that we are recognised as being a key area of expertise in terms of that wider piece of transport infrastructure, but also sustainable travel options to make these sites successful. And that is around both the site at Peterhead, but also the strong relationships we have with ETZ and Opportunity North East. So whilst we might not be at that particular governance structure, we are perhaps only one layer of the onion removed from it. So I do believe that we are being heard in terms of our advice and the connections that we can make in that economic and land use planning environment. Thank you.
Thanks, that's very reassuring.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any more hands on line. Are we happy to agree? Are we happy to agree the report? Great, thank you very much. And we'll now move on to 5.5, the E96 corridor review. Mr. Finch again.
Thank you very much, Chair. Transport Scotland in 28th of November published the final detailed appraisal documents to support the A96 corridor review. We had brought a previous paper to the board in December 22, which was published in 22, which was reported in February 2023. There's a 12-week consultation programme at the moment, and it closes on the 21st of February. We have a draft letter in Appendix A and a questionnaire response in Appendix B for members' consideration and approval. The response has been informed by officers' review of the information, attendance at a stakeholder meeting on the 28th of January, but also a collective and meaningful discussion with our partners at Aberdeenshire Council, at Murray Council, but also with our RTP partners at Hightrans as well. And I think Murray Council considered their response today. I think Hightrans considered their response last week. Board members will also be aware of the considerable history that sits behind the A96 dualling project, which dates back to 2011. We've had various developments. We've had particularly focus work between Craveston and south of Huntly, all the way up to almost finalised designs being taken forward for consultation for that stretch of the road. In August 2021, as an element of the Butte House Agreement, the Scottish Government agreed to take forward transport enhancements on the A96 that improves connectivity between surrounding towns, tackles congestion and addresses safety and environmental issues, and that became known as the A96 Corridor Review. They have published a refined package, which is an alternative to full dualling, obviously has a lower price tag, and it talks about 5, 6, 7 elements: active communities, focusing on active travel within communities, improved public transport interchange facilities, pilot schemes for demand responsive transport and mobility of a service, line speed passenger freight capacity improvements on the railway line, Elgin bypass, Keith bypass, not Inverurie bypass, targeted road safety improvements, and an A96 electric corridor, which again was most likely facilities within local communities rather along the route. Our response is detailed in the report. I think our principal response has been the lack of locally informed input to the appraisal. It seems to have been taken in a series of black boxes, and we've been presented with a review which doesn't really meet the needs of the North East and doesn't really speak to the North East in the way it is presented. The work has been very process driven, potentially giving too much prominence to central government policy perspective than local and regional policy perspectives. The scope of the appraisal seems to have been too constrained to fit the precise terms of Butte House Agreement, rather than being based on a bottom-up assessment of what the communities need, and that's the larger towns, but also those people living along the corridor or in the hinterland of that corridor as well. The lack of detail has been a problem we've struggled with in terms of some of the refined managed elements of the package, and there isn't much clarity on what the bypasses of Elgin and Keith, what standard that would be to as well. Very concerned about the deliverability of many of the aspects of the refined package and their real world impact. For public transport, we need sustained revenue support going forward, but this package only talks about sort of capital measures as well. We are very keen to see expansion of rural bus services, but that doesn't seem to be considered in much detail. Rail freight terminals may be successful, but only successful with the supporting services and other complementary measures that link into them to make that an attractive mode. Otherwise, the road freight will continue. And again, we are unsure about whether some of the measures are truly additional. The electric highway proposal seems to replicate emerging proposals coming from the collaborative work that we're doing in the region around the rollout of future for public sector charging points as well. We're concerned that active travel between communities has been discarded because for our area, that's actually very important, particularly between Inverurie, Kintore, Blackburn, Craveston, enabling links for Huntly as well. We're concerned about the consistency of a policy approach around 20% reduction. And again, with policy, a more significant policy approach has been applied to the work, but the national policy should reflect a variation across the country, and it's hard to see the mechanisms being available on parts of the A96 where that could be meaningfully achieved. We also note that there's an interaction with some of the other proposals that are on this agenda today in terms of changes to the speed limits, for example, as well, which could actually have a significant impact on a road which is 155 kilometres long, the majority of it being single carriageway. So we've provided a draft letter. We've provided a questionnaire response. Clearly, the response demonstrates policy tensions in the bigger goal of what central government and we all want to achieve, but the practical implementation along this corridor as well. We are very firm advocates of alternative to car use for walking, cycling and public transport networks, but that is realistically only possible in the more built-up areas. There are opportunities elsewhere, but again, we need to think about how we deliver rural bus services or other alternatives in these areas as well. It is recommended the board invites Transport Scotland to work with Nestrans, our RTP colleagues and other local authorities to look again at the outcomes of the appraisal and how the corridor can be developed to meet strategic needs. I note that Murray's response that was approved today was looking for supporting the refined package, but as an additional measures on top of appropriate dualling along the corridor as well, and the board may wish to consider something along those lines as well. So it's recommended that the board approve the contents of Appendix A and Appendix B as the response to the consultation and instruct officers to continue engagement with Transport Scotland and their consultants, expressing concerns within the report, but also to seek assurances that local and regional perspectives can be prioritised as the proposals in the area develop. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have, I'm not seeing any questions on this. Councillor MacDonald, sorry.
A tricky one, this, but yes, I'm happy to agree. I just wanted to ask, I guess, on the actual submission that we've put in, we haven't ticked the box for Elgin bypass or the other one, it's escaped my mind. Yeah, Keith. But I do think that does make a difference to and I just wondered why we hadn't actually. I know it's in the Murray area rather than ours, but they do make a difference in the same way that Inverurie would make a difference to people in Murray coming to Aberdeen. So it was just to ask that. And you know, you've laid out the stall very well. I did when I was reading the paper. Really in the last paragraph about making more of a more inclusive, locally and regionally informed manner, which you highlighted, I think, shone out for me as something that I think we should be saying very, very clearly. It will only work if you take people with you, and I think the A96 work has shown that consistently over the years. It has been damaging in terms of the longevity and the uncertainty that it's brought to individuals, businesses, and communities. So that was a bit of a comment, but I think there is a question in there about the bypass work.
Donald, if you could switch off your microphone, so and Mr. Ross as well, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. First of all, it's an excellent report and it's very comprehensive. I know we can't add every little bit of detail, but one of the big issues for the average person in the A96 is the lack of overtaking opportunity. And that was mentioned in the previous item on the Ellen Fraserburgh corridor. And I just wonder if there's any appetite, without overdoing the content, just to make that point in the text, because that's probably, if you're a typical driver on the A96, that's probably the thing that causes the most frustration. It's not just a convenience thing. The frustration causes people to do the wrong thing. They make the wrong manoeuvres, they overtake when they shouldn't. It's probably one of the top issues for people who are using the road. Thank you.
Yep, I agree with the frustration about overtaking. Mr. Finch, if you could cover comments by Councillor MacDonald and what Mr. Ross has said.
Yeah, I decline to tick the Elgin and the Keith box because they are out with our area, but I take your point that they also affect our constituents' councils, so that could be easily achieved. And the point about lack of overtaking opportunities again could be reinforced within the text of the submission, so I'm happy to take that on board as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradley.
Yeah, I'd be quite keen to see that come through, some of the commentary that's going through, if that's possible, if we've got board agreement.
I'm not seeing any other hands. Are we happy to incorporating the comments that you made and incorporating, if we can add an addendum to note our support for full dualling as outlined by Mr. Finch in his comments? Are we happy to agree the recommendations with those addendums? Yep. Great, thank you very much. We'll now move on to 5.6, National Travel Planning Resources. Caroline Hood.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this paper is to update members about the proposed procurement of a national travel planning resource for workplaces across Scotland, and this will be done by Nestrans on behalf of all seven regional transport partnerships. In early 2025, RTPs met to discuss the continued funding of National Travel Planning Resource. TACTRAN, having previously coordinated this activity on behalf of all 7 of the RTPs, made it known they would like to pass over the administration and procurement responsibilities to another RTP, and it was agreed that Nestrans would assume this role on behalf of all RTPs. As such, Nestrans is currently in discussion with RTPs and our local procurement advisors on a possible procurement process for financial year 2025-26. It's anticipated this will take a format of an invitation to quote prepared by Nestrans to provide a licence for the use of a national travel planning website and associated business. Nestrans will hold the contract with the chosen provider for the provision of a national travel planning resource and gather funds from the remaining RTPs to meet the financial obligation of the contract. For context, for financial year 24-25, this totaled just over £72,000 across all 7 of the RTPs, and Nestrans' contribution based on a similar formula for 2025-26 would be approximately £6,600. It's the intention that any procurement would occur via Public Contract Scotland, and as the anticipated total value of the new contract would exceed £50,000 under Nestrans financial regulations, the approval of any contract award of this value requires board approval, and due to the requirement to award the contract as as possible on behalf of our RTP network, the approval of the board is sought to provide the director with delegated authority to award the contract at the end of the procurement process. It is undertaken that any significant variation to the anticipated costs will be reported back to the chair and vice chairs accordingly. It's recommended to the board that the contents of this report are noted, and Nestrans' role in coordinating the provision of a national travel planning resource on behalf of all 7 RTPs going forwards endorses a contribution of around £6,700 for inclusion within the Nestrans budget for financial year 2025-26 as a proportional share of the total national costs for this resource, and finally grants delegated authority to the Partnership Director to award the contract for the provision of a national travel planning resource following completion of the procurement exercise in liaison with commercial and procurement services. And thank you, Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions on this report.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing. Councillor MacDonald. Sorry.
Now, I don't know, this is just me, but I had never heard of Travel Know-How Scotland, and it's been on the go for years. Whatever we do going forward, I think there's a bit of promotion and so on, and maybe others have heard of it, but I certainly, when I read this report, I thought, why don't I know about this? So I couldn't really see in the report that, I mean, I'm imagining it's going out to tender to see who comes up with it. But if it's certainly the same people that have done it for the last few years, then I think, you know, there's an element there that it needs to be better communicated to users or businesses, or whoever it is that we want to tap into this resource.
Thank you, Councillor MacDonald. That is a good point, well made, and one I will take on board, and we'll seek to make changes around that moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. In lieu of seeing any other hands up, are we happy to agree the recommendations? Good. Thank you very much. We'll move on to number 6, action plan 6.1, development of regional active travel network. Mr. Finch.
Thank you again, Chair. In September, we brought before the board a report regarding the approval of the Regional Active Travel Network, the associated appendices, and the plan for publication on the Nestrans website. We had a good and lively debate in the chamber on that day, and 3 of the 4 recommendations were approved. And there was support for progressing the Regional Active Travel Network, supporting the adoption for partner local authorities as part of their local transport strategy and their delivery planning, and supporting the maintenance of the plan as a live document so we can regularly review it and update it in light of wider developments. During discussion, there was a few points that were made that we committed to taking away, and I'm bringing this paper back to report on the progression of these aspects. We were going to further review some of the information just to ensure that there was no inaccurate data and everything that was on the plan was correct as per the officer's intentions as refined by the consultation. The idea of a clearer position on planned timescales for future investment to be developed, and simplification to enable current routes to assist cyclists to plan journeys. Taking each of those points in turn, we are following the meeting. We went back to the consultants who prepared the board. We went back to the 2 working groups who had devised the plan, and that was one in Aberdeenshire Council and one in Aberdeen City Council, ensuring that everything that was on the GIS plan was correct and intentional. And it was confirmed that that was indeed the case. We had Councillor Reid was particularly interested in one of the routes he regularly used in and around Kintore, and why wasn't that on the plan? And in that example, there were other examples. The future plan anticipated routes to the north and the south of that plan, which would make the route in the middle in the future not one that would be taken forward going forward, and that was the explanation for that one not being on the plan, because the anticipation was that the routes to the north and the south would be more useful and would be able to be developed to a better standard at some point in the future. Not to say the existing route would be ignored, but that was how we saw the plan being built out. So we were able to confirm that every line on the map was intentional and correct in terms of the future planning for the actual network. There was a request for routes to be made clear over the current position or planned timescales for completion to be included, and that's about future plans or the pipeline. We recognise this, and we are working on a plan to develop what's on the ground now and our short to medium term planned development. That work is in train. I hope to have been able to bring you drafts of that plan at the moment. Unfortunately, I wasn't quite able to meet the deadline for the board to see those. But we are almost at the point of being able to provide those plans to the board for their consideration, looking at how we can demonstrate what's on the ground at the moment. And in Aberdeen City, that was very well mapped, but in Aberdeenshire, less well mapped. And there was also the challenge of, well, what the standards would be, because there's a continuation of different standards. But we've adopted a standard about being a designated route, 2.5 metres wide, hard bound, and dividing it into those different categories. So I really do look forward to bringing that plan to you at a future board meeting for your consideration. We're also working on progressing the map of pipeline of proposals, again, short to medium term, under the categories of those proposals which are under construction, those proposals that are in design, and those that are in a future pipeline or appraisal or associated with a committed budget commitment. And they would again be linked to timescales for implementation. Again, we're making very good progress with that plans. And again, I hope to be able to bring you examples of those plans for the next meeting of the board to provide that clarity. There was also a request to provide a simplified map to assist cyclists to plan journeys. We're a bit wary of that because we think that would take significant mapping resource that we do not have within Nestrans to facilitate that itself. There are a range of online tools and publications that do exist which can provide route planning opportunities for cyclists and other active travel users. And of course, the plans that we produce could well be used for that purpose, but the essential requirement of the plan would be more based around infrastructure, planning and prioritisation work. The next steps are, again, following board consideration of the above points and pending board approval of the, we've published the report and the link to the RATN network on the plan. We'll keep that as a live document so it can be readily referred to and updated as other consultation exercises take place. And that includes like the place planning processes that are ongoing at the moment and the local development plan. And we also propose to bring the current cycling infrastructure plan and the pipeline proposals to a subsequent meeting of the board, and I'd hope to be able to do that in April. It's recommended that the board approve the Regional Active Travel Network technical documentation and network plan for publication, and request that future reports are presented on the development of the current cycling infrastructure plan and the pipeline proposals plan. Thank you very much, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you for that. I'm not seeing any hands on my screen, so I'm seeing three across the chamber, though. I'll go left to right. Councillor MacDonald, then Councillor Wadley, Councillor Gregg. Councillor MacDonald.
Right, we've got a plan to have a plan in place. So I just I wasn't clear about that middle bit, when that was coming back to the board, the routes to be made clearer a bit. Is that coming back in April, or when?
I'd like to bring those back to the board in April.
That's clear now. Thank you. That is a plan. Thank you.
Councillor Wadley.
Thank you. I guess great to see this coming forward, and looking forward to seeing it come at the full plan in April. We as a city have our local transport strategy currently sort of going through the processes. How are these two documents going to interact, because they're sort of interdependent?
I will answer that to say that we are working all the information that we have collated on the future plan, the existing plan, and the the bits that are in progression, all that information is coming from local authority officials. And they are generally the same local authority officials who are working on the respective local transport strategies. So it is the same information, it is just how we're bringing them together and presenting them that's the key thing here. We are very aware of the work that the evidence reports have been done in the local development plan as well as the local transport plan. And if we're going out for calls for ideas, then this will be a very interesting resource for the developers to think about what the existing proposals may or may not be. Hence my desire to try and get this onto the website to help support that process. Thank you.
I'll just bring in David Dunn, who might have a wee bit more to add to that. Mr. Dunn.
Thanks, Chair. So I suppose just to clarify, you'll be aware that the city brought its local transport strategy or put it out for consultation quite some time ago. In the context of this coming forward and a few other projects, it was decided to delay bringing that back. And I explained to the Net Zero Committee previously that we would be bringing it back with a view to going back out to consult again in the context of having that fed into the process. So we will be aiming, and we have been working with Nestrans on that. We will be bringing it back to the Net Zero Committee.
Thank you. Councillor Gregg.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was a query about the cyclist mapping, which is in the report. I mean, I would have thought that regionally based cycle mapping could really support active travel, but from what I'm reading, it appears that that's quite challenging because of the varying range of cyclists' interests and abilities. But I mean, we have been able to produce cycle maps in the city in consultation with the Cycle Forum. So is there not? I mean, is there not an opportunity there to develop a cycle map for the city and for Aberdeenshire in some way? I mean, it seems to suggest that that's not really being brought forward. So more information would be appreciated.
Yes, for you, Chair. There is a resource available online at the moment. The principal focus of the work we're doing at the moment is to get the information that is available to the certain standards so we can use that for infrastructure planning. To then take that to a region-wide network that shows every single cycling opportunity, which might be a shortcut through cul-de-sacs, it might be an unbound path, it might be something fully to standard, such as we have in Craigshaw, is a significant task to collate that information to a consistent standard, to maintain it, and then to present it. So it would be a really good resource to have. I'm not arguing that. I'm just managing my expectations of how difficult it's actually been to get to this stage and to collate all the information and to map it at this stage.
Thanks. Yeah, I absolutely get that. I mean, I'm just aware that in the city we've benefited from considerable voluntary input from the Cycle Forum, and they've helped to identify those desire lines that we would like to develop for cycling. So there may be a resource out there, a voluntary or third sector resource, who might be worthwhile helping with this task.
Yep. Mr. Dunn, do you want to come in on this?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just to give Mr. Finch a bit of support in this regard, you're absolutely right, Councillor Craig. The Cycle Forum were immensely helpful, as were other cycle supporters within the city in developing the cycle map that we have. I would say that map, I think everybody would agree, probably needs a refresh. But the capacity to actually do that is quite challenging. And I suppose within the city, we do benefit from, I'm going to say, a rather compact geographic area, plus a network of hard paved surfaces. Whether people deem them to be suitable for cycling on is a different matter. But obviously, across Aberdeenshire, you have a huge spectrum of surfaces and materials, some which, will be suitable for anybody to cycle on, others which will absolutely not be. So I think I can see how it's a much more significant challenge for colleagues in Aberdeenshire.
I'm not seeing any other hands. I'm seeing a cycling map to my side. Mr. Wallace.
Seeing as Mr. Dunn referenced Aberdeenshire as well, I thought it was only fair to give a little bit of a, I suppose, a perspective from what we work with our communities on. So anecdotally, when I go to various community councils across Aberdeenshire, one of the things that they universally actually give us praise for is the way that we actually develop those localised cycle maps and the way in which they're used by cycle groups. But we've never taken that next step of how do you join up all the different community areas because of the way in which they're used by those groups. I absolutely see that there could be something in terms of I suppose it's almost like bringing together groups. If they wish to try and do something like that, all the information's there. But I think what Mr. Finch is saying and Mr. Dunn's saying, and we would focus on some other things in the first instance. So, but I'm trying to think. The number of different maps there will be heavily used, and if anything, keeping up to date with them is probably the challenge for the team. So hopefully that adds a little bit to the debate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Finals. Hopefully getting it final time. I see no hands this time. Definitely. Are we agreed in the recommendations? Good. Thank you very much. We'll move on to 6.2, the bus action plan update. Adam Kench.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides Board with an update on recent work to assess the current state of the bus network in the region. Following its inception in 2018, the Bus Alliance Board agreed to produce a State of the Network report, and this was published in June 2019. Since early 2024, the Bus Alliance has been working on a refreshed report, and I would like to thank partners for their support with this. A final draft was reviewed by the Bus Alliance Board in January 2024. As a refresh of a previously produced report, there is an opportunity to assess progress, identify positive trends, and areas that still require intervention. The full report is included as Appendix A, but the board report identifies 7 key steps which are worth noting. One of the key points identified in the report is around the challenging financial climate, and heading 4 relates to funding, which highlights the difficulties faced by both the public and private sector. So despite this, significant investment has been made as an alliance, and we continue to explore funding opportunities available, such as the proposed Scottish Government Bus Infrastructure Fund for 2025-26. Regarding the next steps, this refresh is an important step in introducing a bus services improvement partnership in the region. The 2019 report played an important role in establishing the bus action plan that was published in April 2020. And this was set out to be a 5-year action plan, and officers will bring forward a final updated bus action plan to the next board meeting. Beyond this, further work is needed to understand the role of the action plan in the context of regional partners entering a BSIP. Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And I'll just quickly pop in with my own question first, just having a look. So there's one thing that I've heard, at least anecdotally recently, has been issues or difficulties training, recruiting and retaining drivers in the northeast, and there's increased competition now with a new bus firm having started in the area. Do you have any comments upon how whether this is an issue that operators are experiencing, and how folk are working to overcome that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So operators are working hard on combating this. I think especially since the introduction of Ember, there's been increased competition for drivers, and both First and Stagecoach, through their involvement in the Alliance, have raised this with us. So it's an issue we are aware of.
Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any hands online. I'm not seeing any hands in the chamber. Are we happy to agree the recommendations? Yeah. Agreed. Thank you very much. We move on to number 7, the progress report. Do we have any questions on any items under that? No. We agreed that. Agreed. Number 8, publications and consultations. Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. Item 8 from page 369 includes a number of publications and consultations that we've had across our desk. There seem to be quite a plethora of publications round about the Christmas week.
So staff have been busy having a look at them and have put together some responses and some comments which are for information. I think there are 2 of the 6 that we've identified that probably require a response to be agreed by the board. The first of these is the National Speed Management Review. The National Speed Management Review is obviously a key part of Transport Scotland's aim to reduce casualties towards a vision of 0 fatalities by 2050, which Fiona Brown mentioned in her speech today. The Speed Management Review included looking at 2 options primarily. The first was for single carriageway speeds for cars and motorcycles to be reduced to a speed limit of 50 miles per hour from the existing 60, but an increase for goods vehicles to 50 miles per hour. So trying to get away from that discrepancy between lorries going very slowly and cars, motorcycles going a bit faster. The whole question about overtaking opportunities has cropped up today as well. The second option was for cars and motorcycles to have a decreased speed limit to 50 miles per hour, both on single carriageways and on dual carriageways. We did discuss this at the Road Safety North East Scotland meeting recently, I think it was last week. And I think the conclusion, and we've pulled it together as a draft response at Appendix A, excess speed relating to limits isn't the be-all and end-all, that really it's about wrong speeds, it's about inappropriate driver behaviour, and that we feel that we couldn't really recommend to you that we opt for either option 1 or option 2. We don't believe that a blanket restriction on speed limits will resolve the problems that we would like to see looked at. So the recommendation is that we put in that response, which is, as I say, Appendix A, concluding that Nestrans doesn't support either option 1 or 2, but we should be looking at be supportive of an increase in HGV speeds, which would take away some of the problems around driver frustration and overtaking issues. There's also, I think was touched on earlier, sustainable transport have been audited in relation to, Transport Scotland have been audited in relation to the 20% reduction in car kilometres. That's a document there on pages 370, 371, 372 that pulls out some of the key recommendations. It's not a consultation. We thought we should bring it to your attention, but there's no response required at this stage. The recommendations are included as Appendix B at page 381. There have also been 2 documents relating to the National Transport Strategy, both the 4th Delivery Plan and a Monitoring and Evaluation Report. The key points, I think, are picked out there. Again, they are both for noting. On page 374, there is a response to the draft electric vehicle public charging network implementation plan. I'm sure we can get an acronym for that, but I haven't got one yet. A draft response to that has been pulled together, is included as Appendix C, and I think relates to both local authority areas, and there has been consultation around pulling that together. Finally, there has also been proposed changes to legislation on electrically assisted pedal cyclists, or pedal cycles, I should say. That one has been produced by the Department for Transport, but is a UK-wide consideration. They've had a look at it, but they don't propose taking forward any proposals to the consultation that they had at this stage. So the recommendations are for the board to consider and approve the draft letter at Appendix A, the draft response at Appendix C, and to otherwise note the publication of the documents. Again, happy to take any questions or pick up any points.
Yep, thank you for that. Councillor Black.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for that introduction. I want to go back to the National Speed Management Review. Totally agree with the response that is within the papers. It is very much down to driver behaviour and inappropriate speeds on roads. That is the issue as opposed to the speed limits themselves. One thing that I had thought of, and for transparency, I am a driving instructor, so I kind of know where I'm coming from with this. Rural roads. The national speed limit on a rural road is 60 miles an hour. Very, very few rural roads are appropriate for that speed. And by rural road, I mean like lanes, narrow country lanes. So it's not proposed within the review. It's not mentioned anywhere else, but would it be appropriate putting an idea forward that on those types of roads, absolutely a reduction in the speed limit would be appropriate. However, on normal B roads, A roads, it's not appropriate. I would suggest 40 miles an hour.
Yep, that is, thanks for that. I think that's pretty much where we were trying to get to, that this review has been about the strategic network, whereas actually we feel there are bigger fish to fry in terms of what's dangerous in roads which aren't appropriate for national speed limit. Ewan might want to touch on the fact that Aberdeenshire have had a couple of experiments around lower speed limits on rural roads. Looks like he's going to delegate to Martin, but if I could ask these guys just to touch on that, thanks.
Yeah. Is it Mr. Hall?
Yeah, I'll give that a go. Thank you. The trials we had in Aberdeenshire were around quiet lanes, quiet routes or active travel. They didn't include changes to the speed limit. The reason being was we were going to wait and see what the national guidance on speed setting would be, and colleagues in roads have got an ongoing process to review our speed setting policy. At the moment, that's focused on rolling out our 20 mile an hour limits, but there is an action on that to look at setting the speed limits on rural roads, particularly around quiet roads, and looking at routes that may benefit from reduced speed limits to promote active and sustainable travel.
Yeah. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you. Can I ask around the data that would be available to try and inform whoever wants to make a decision on this around road traffic accidents and all? I mean, I just want to get a sense of how robust, how widespread, or even how accessible that type of data is to organisations or even members of the public, because it certainly comes up quite often as a lead story in the local press about what's happening on our major routes and so on, and taking up Dawn's point as well about other roads. But I never personally have the sense that I have a real handle on we all kind of know the kind of black spots and the difficulties, but to make an informed decision around the options that were here must be really difficult unless you have good, robust data to base your thinking on. And I just wondered if that was if something that we had to look at. Not us. I don't want to look at it, but if you were looking at data.
It's certainly one of the concerns I had about the consultation, that it seemed to be asking opinion on, do you think there is a problem type questions, whereas I felt personally they should have the evidence to be making a decision. I'm going to hand over to Caroline, who pulled this bit of the report together, because she's so much more au fait with the data than me. So if I could ask Caroline to come in.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's the reported road casualties Scotland report comes out annually, which will give you more of a regional picture, but through Road Safety North East Scotland, which RAB currently chairs and which will pass to Martin Hall upon RAB's retirement, we work with colleagues across local authorities in City, Shire and Moray, and it's my role there to ask them for recent casualty statistics. We also have input from Chief Inspector level and Area Commander for the North and Police Scotland, who can give us further context. So all of that information is helpful to us in forming an opinion on this. And I agree, it's not overly transparent. And unless you work with these statistics regularly, know where to find them, know how to use them, it is difficult. But what has been suggested is that in the same way that we report back the HTAP minute for the steering group in the board papers, that we look to do that with Road Safety North East Scotland as well, which might add an additional level of transparency and assistance in understanding a very regional picture on road safety, if that would be of assistance.
Yeah, because I guess one of the things I would be interested in is if are there more, or how many accidents are because somebody's going at 40 instead of 50 or 60 or whatever, you know, is that kind of statistic?
So the question was raised with Chief Inspector Richard Ross at the last Road Safety North East Scotland meeting as to whether there was any consistent pattern in fatalities. And unfortunately, he was able to report that there is not. A lot of it tends to be in connection with poor driver behaviour and essentially, I think to paraphrase, poor choice. And that was why when we were providing feedback on this, we felt that the focus on excess speed wasn't necessarily helpful, that it's looking at inappropriate speed and wider driver behaviour in terms of how people treat each other in the road environment. But unfortunately, there's no consistent pattern in the fatality level in particular. Speed does play a role, but in reviewing the Stats 19 reports where officers record data, there's nothing consistent that can be reported back for the North East. That through Road Safety North East Scotland that we continue to observe. So we hope that reporting that minute back would be helpful to members in understanding that regional picture.
Thank you for that. Councillor Turner.
Just a comment following what Don was suggesting there on rural. To me, I can think of many different types of rural road, and I can see, you know, a lot of this is driver behaviour and exceeding speed. You know, this really is beyond perhaps what they should be doing for that particular road. But it's back to when I actually think, what is a rural road? It can mean so many different things, and that the word rural, in some respects, for me, is actually difficult to actually define. So I'd almost kind of welcome comments from Brad, just what his thoughts are. It's, if anything, please.
Yeah, thanks through you, Chair. I think it's easier to go the other way and define what are strategic roads. Yeah. And the strategic roads has been the focus of this review, partly because it's been led by Transport Scotland, and obviously that is partly their concern, but it also includes A-class roads operated by the councils. So I think if we take out the strategic and the A-class roads, I think my view would be actually we need to be looking at case by case roads, routes, what's appropriate for roads out with that strategic element. And that's the vast majority of the kilometres within an area like Aberdeenshire. And probably Aberdeen City actually as well, but I know that 20 mile per hour default is slightly different because it's come in an urban context. Caroline, I think it would be quite appropriate for us to include something further, maybe a paragraph or two within the draft letter, articulating some of the discussion we've had today. I'm quite happy to look at that and include that.
Thank you for that. Are we happy to agree the recommendations as we have them? Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 9, the information. So, yeah, the information bulletin. Do we have any? Do you want to give an introduction to that, Mr. Dixon?
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly, a couple of items which are in the information bulletin, but are for members' information and noting. So, press and comms are included in Appendix A to this report. You can see what has been going into the press, both from Nestrans statements and news releases, and also coverage which has related to items that we've spoken about. Also wanted to touch on the Health and Transport Action Plan, which was considered by this board a few months ago, but was formally launched, having been made into a publication style. It was formally launched on the 3rd of February. We also do an annual count on park and ride sites, both the bus-based park and ride sites and the railway station sites. This year, when we did our count, we do a one-day annual count, which I know isn't probably statistically valid, but we feel it's actually very helpful, and we've done it over a period of years, going back 10 years now. So this year there were 453 cars parked in the 5 bus park and ride sites, and there were 399 cars parked in the 8 stations that have car parks for commuting. So in total, that's 852 cars on a single day that probably didn't have to drive the full distance or didn't have to come into a city centre, contribute to congestion and air quality problems, and look for a parking space. So it is a significant number, and we monitor that over time. You can see that obviously there was a massive decline in 2020, 2021, but we're now quite back towards 2019 levels. We've also submitted a response to the Citizen Participation and Public Petitions Committee, which is included as an Appendix C to the report. Lawrence Kirk Junction, the draft orders have been published, which again were included in Fiona Brown's presentation. And finally, just to let you know that the Nestrans annual report and business plan again have been published on the Nestrans website. We also send that and them to the Cabinet Secretary and to the Chief Executives of both councils. The report's there for members' information and for noting, but if there are any questions, I will try my best to answer them.
I'm not seeing any hands online or in the chamber. We're happy to note that report. Thank you very much. Item number 10, conferences and presentations. Mr. Dixon again.
Thank you. Conferences and presentations, quite a busy period again, although we are now finding that the vast majority of conferences that we are attending are now free to attend. There was a time where we used to pay to go to conferences in Edinburgh and Glasgow at great expense, as well as rail fares and etc. The vast majority of conferences are now either held online, hybrid, or are free to attend. So particularly some of the newer members of staff have been able to represent Nestrans at some of them, and I think gaining a lot of knowledge around that. There's a couple of presentations mentioned there as well, by John and Paul, and it's there really for members noting and information.
Again, I'm not seeing any hands online or in the chamber. We're happy to note that. Thank you very much. Number 11, pending business and reports for future meetings. Once again, Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Chair. Item 11, a couple of reports have been brought forward and are on today's agenda. So quite substantive reports, and a few that are to follow that we're hoping to bring to you soon. Aberdeen Lawrence Kirk project, a multimodal study, is moving towards a final report. ART, we're hoping to get the strategic business case within the next period. Annual monitoring report, I think we'll aim to bring to the April report, and there are a couple of others there that we will be bringing forward as and when we can. I wanted not to ignore the fact that I know members have been asking about proposals for future site visits. So we have given it some thought, but with the in-person event on the People in Place programme being held at Huntly on the 12th of March, we felt that that was a real opportunity, probably one of the places we would have chosen to take the board to. So we thought we would wait and see how that went and whether members felt that was useful. We also think it might be worthwhile thinking whether it would be appropriate to host one of the future meetings at either Buchan House in Peterhead or for Martin House in Ellen, if members were so inclined that that would be useful. Both of these venues have facilities like this one, so it could be hybrid for anyone that wasn't able to go. And if we did choose one of these, the intent would be that there would be things to see and presentations to be made that were relevant to that area. So the recommendations really are to note at this stage, but particularly to note the invitation. I know John's hoping to get more responses on the People in Place event at the Huntly on the 12th of March. And then if there are any views regarding Peterhead or Fraserburgh, or Ellen as a future venue, we would welcome them. Thank you.
Councillor Radley.
Thank you, Chair. I guess in terms of ability to get there, Ellen would be easier for city folks. I'm aware that one of our members might not be able to get here and one of our members doesn't have access to private transport, so Ellen is the easier option on a bus. Just throwing that one out there.
Councillor MacDonald.
I think it's a great idea, and I don't really mind which one it is, so leave it up to others to decide what they want to do. But Alan's obviously nearer to Aberdeen, but there might be other considerations as well.
Yep. Do you have any other comments from online or in person? I'm taking that as not. Are we happy? You, in that case, we're happy to agree the pending business. And on that point, just before we move into private business, just to re-thank Rab for his time as director, and this is last time in public eye, at least, for as director of Nestrans in the board meeting. So thank you for once again, thank you very much, and we'll just move into private session now, and I'll pass on to Ms. Finch to take us through that.
Thank you, Chair. So